hospitals are places where life begins and, for many, where it ends. They are filled with memories, both joyous and tragic. But what happens when the patients leave, the staff moves on, and the walls are left to crumble in silence? Abandoned hospitals hold a certain weight, a lingering presence of the past. For years, thrill seekers, urban explorers, and the curious have ventured into these decaying buildings, searching for adrenaline or answers. What they often find instead are questions they wish they had never asked. Tonight, I'll share with you 3 terrifying stories from abandoned hospitals. These are first-hand accounts of people who dared to enter these hallowed halls, only to discover they weren't alone. From unexplained sounds to shadowy figures and encounters that defy explanation, these stories will make you think twice before stepping into the unknown. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and prepare yourself. These are the haunted tales of abandoned hospitals. First story, the shadow in the surgery room. A few years ago, my friends and I were obsessed with exploring abandoned places. There was something about the eerie silence and decaying walls that fascinated us. One night, we decided to visit an old hospital on the outskirts of town. It had been shut down for decades, and stories about its haunted halls only made it more appealing to us. We arrived just after midnight. The hospital loomed over us, its windows shattered and its doors barely hanging on their hinges. We brought flashlights, but the weak beams barely illuminated the endless corridors. As we stepped inside, the air felt heavy, like the building was holding its breath. The graffiti-covered walls told stories of others who had dared to enter, but most of the messages were warnings: don't go further, it's still here, and simply, run. Despite the unease, we pressed on. One of my friends, Chris, was particularly excited about finding the surgery room, which was rumored to be the most haunted part of the hospital. According to local legends, a surgeon had gone mad and performed unauthorized procedures on patients before the hospital was shut down. We found the surgery room on the 3rd floor. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as we pushed it open. Inside, the operating table was still there, rusted and covered in what looked like dried stains. Cabinets with shattered glass held scattered medical tools, and the air smelled faintly metallic, like old blood. As we stood there, taking in the eerie scene, we heard it, a faint tapping sound, coming from the corner of the room. We turned our flashlights toward it, but there was nothing there. Then the tapping moved, now coming from the other side of the room. Chris laughed nervously, suggesting it was just an animal. But the tapping turned into footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the room. We couldn't see anyone, but the sound was unmistakable. I whispered for us to leave, but Chris insisted on staying a little longer. He walked toward the old cabinets, joking about finding a scalpel to take home as a souvenir. That's when we all saw it. A shadow moved across the room, but there was no one to cast it. Chris froze, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The shadow didn't disappear, it grew larger, stretching across the walls until it seemed to envelop the entire room. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. We didn't wait to see what would happen next. We bolted down the hall, our footsteps echoing in the empty building. As we reached the exit, I glanced back and saw it again, the shadow, standing in the doorway of the surgery room, watching us leave. We never went back to that hospital. To this day, I can't explain what we saw, but I know one thing for sure: something still lingers in those halls, and it doesn't want visitors. Second story, the nurse's station. A few years ago, I was working on a photography project that involved capturing abandoned buildings. One of my goals was to find an old hospital I had heard about, a massive structure left to decay for over 30 years. It was known locally as St. Margaret's, and stories of strange occurrences kept most people away. I arrived in the late afternoon, hoping to finish before dark, but I underestimated how large the building was. By the time I set up my camera, the sun had already started to set, casting long shadows through the broken windows. The place was a maze of peeling paint, rusted bed frames, and forgotten medical equipment. I decided to focus on the nurse's station on the 2nd floor. It was in surprisingly good condition, with a large desk still intact and old patient files scattered across the floor. As I photographed the area, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I told myself it was just nerves. After all, the place was unsettling. But then I heard it, a soft humming, like someone singing a lullaby. It was faint, but clear enough to send chills down my spine. I froze, straining to hear where it was coming from. The humming grew louder, echoing down the hallway behind me. Slowly, I turned my head and aimed my flashlight down the corridor. It was empty. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. There was no response, just a steady hum, growing closer. I tried to convince myself it was the wind or maybe an animal. But then I saw movement, a figure, just at the edge of my flashlight's reach. It looked like a woman in a nurse's uniform, standing perfectly still. Her face was obscured by shadows, but I could feel her eyes on me. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice cracking. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, humming that haunting tune. I grabbed my camera and snapped a photo, hoping to capture whatever, or whoever, was there. The flash lit up the hallway for a split second, and in that moment, she was gone. I should have left then, but curiosity got the better of me. I checked the photo on my camera. The hallway was empty, except for the reflection in a broken window. There she was, standing right behind me. My blood ran cold. I spun around, but there was no one there. The humming had stopped. The silence was deafening. I didn't bother packing up my equipment. I grabbed my bag and ran, not stopping until I was outside, gasping for air. Later that night, I looked through the photos again. Most of them were normal, just shots of the decaying hospital. But in one photo, taken of the nurse's station, there was a faint figure behind the desk. She was staring straight at the camera, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. I've never gone back to St. Margaret's. Whatever I encountered that day wasn't just my imagination. Something, or someone, still roams those halls, and I'm not brave enough to face it again. Third story, the morgue door. It happened 3 years ago when I was helping a friend film a short horror movie. He had found the perfect setting, an abandoned hospital that was rumored to be haunted. I wasn't thrilled about spending the night in such a place, but I agreed to help with the project. We arrived just as the sun was setting, carrying our equipment through the overgrown parking lot. The hospital loomed above us, its broken windows resembling dark, empty eyes. My friend, Mark, was excited, but I felt uneasy from the moment we stepped inside. The hospital was massive, with endless hallways and countless rooms. We decided to start filming in the basement, where the morgue was located. Mark thought it would add an authentic creep factor to the film. As we descended the stairs, the temperature dropped noticeably. The air felt damp, and the faint smell of decay lingered, even after all these years. The morgue was at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor. The heavy metal door was slightly ajar, creaking as we pushed it open. Inside, the room was exactly what you'd expect: cold, sterile tiles, and rusting metal drawers where bodies had once been stored. Mark was ecstatic, setting up his camera and directing me to move props around. About an hour into filming, we started hearing faint noises, like shuffling footsteps, just beyond the door. We paused, listening intently, but the sound stopped. "Probably rats," Mark said dismissively, but his voice lacked confidence. We continued filming, but the noises started again. This time, they were louder, and they didn't stop. It sounded like someone, or something, was pacing just outside the morgue. Mark, trying to keep the mood light, joked, "Maybe the spirits don't like us disturbing their peace." I didn't laugh. Finally, I mustered the courage to open the door and check. The hallway was empty, but the shuffling sounds persisted. They seemed to be coming from above us, like someone was dragging their feet across the floor directly overhead. We decided to wrap up and leave, but as we were packing the equipment, the morgue door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound echoed through the room, and we both froze. Mark ran to the door and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. "Stop messing around," he said, thinking I was playing a prank. but the look on my face told him I wasn't. Suddenly, the drawers in the morgue started to rattle. One by one, they creaked open, as if an unseen force was pulling them out. I grabbed Mark's arm, and we both backed into a corner, watching in horror. Then, the shuffling footsteps returned, louder than ever, accompanied by a low, guttural moan. The air grew heavier, making it hard to breathe. Mark banged on the door, yelling for help, but we both knew no one was coming. Out of desperation, I grabbed a heavy piece of equipment and slammed it against the door handle. After several attempts, the lock gave way, and we stumbled out into the hallway. We didn't stop running until we were outside, gasping for air in the parking lot. When we finally dared to look back, the morgue door was slightly open again, as if inviting us to return. Mark swore he would never set foot in another abandoned building, and I haven't either. Whatever was in that morgue didn't want us there, and I have no intention of ever finding out what it was. And so we reached the end of another set of chilling stories. As we've seen, abandoned hospitals, with their history of life and death, still hold dark secrets that should never be challenged. If you're still curious about exploring these places, remember, some things are better left in the past, and there are shadows that prefer to be forgotten. Now, as you reflect on these experiences, you might think fear is just a product of the imagination. But as we've seen, there are things that cannot be explained with logic or reason. And what's even more terrifying is that these experiences, seemingly isolated, all share something in common, the sense that something, or someone, is always watching. If you've had a similar experience or know someone who's encountered something strange in an abandoned hospital, share it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real stories that will continue to send shivers down your spine. Until next time, and remember, fear is real, and it never disappears completely. Good night, and sleep tight, if you can.